The Galactic Council chamber was a marvel of architecture. A vast, domed room lined with arches that seemed to glow with a faint, ethereal light. Representatives from every corner of the known galaxy sat in their appointed seats, their faces a mix of concern and trepidation. It was an unusual sight to see such a diverse collection of species gathered in one place, united by a shared fear. Today, they were here to discuss the rising threat of the Xerian swarm, a relentless force that had torn through several star systems without any attempt at diplomacy or restraint. The tension in the air was palpable. The Xerian swarm was unlike any threat they had faced before, a species immune to negotiation, driven only by an insatiable hunger to consume and conquer. Diplomatic envoys had been sent, and none had returned. No communication attempts had worked, and the swarm advanced, leaving only ruin in its path. Amidst the murmurs and the flicker of holographic displays showing maps of the affected sectors, whispers of fear about humanity drifted through the room. The humans were known for their unpredictable nature, sometimes reckless, sometimes brilliant, always hard to understand by those who valued methodical, calculated actions. There were rumors, ancient stories passed down by those who had once warred with them, that the humans possessed a dangerous ability, a state of pure rage and fury, known as the Berserker Rage. Councillor Valron, a tall, insectoid representative from the Zarlak system, raised his voice above the din. His chitinous exoskeleton glistened under the chamber's lights as he spoke. "We must address the question of the human proposal," he said, his mandibles clicking with unease. "They wish to unleash their so-called Berserkers against the swarm. But I ask you, can we trust a weapon that they themselves can barely control? Are we inviting another monster to fight the one at our gates?" The room fell silent. Eyes turned toward the group of humans seated at the edge of the chamber. Captain Elena Dre stood slowly, her posture straight, her eyes locked on Valron. Her presence commanded attention. She was not tall compared to many of the species present, but there was something about the way she held herself that spoke of experience and unyielding resolve. "Councillor Valron," Elena began, her voice clear and unwavering. "I understand your concerns. The Berserker Rage is not something we use lightly. It's a power that comes with risks. But it is also the only thing that has the potential to turn the tide against the Xerian swarm. Diplomacy has failed. The swarm doesn't understand restraint or negotiation. They only understand power. And we have that power." Elena paused, allowing her words to settle. She could see the distrust in their eyes, the fear that humans would lose control, that their rage would make them as dangerous as the enemy they sought to fight. But she also saw something else. Hope, however faint, that perhaps humanity's unpredictability was exactly what they needed. "My team, the Wrathborn, are ready," she continued. "We have trained for this. We have learned to control the rage, to harness it as a weapon instead of letting it consume us. We do not do this for glory or conquest. We do this because we must. If we do nothing, the swarm will reach all of our worlds, and none of us will be safe." The murmurs began again, but this time they carried a different tone, a mix of fear and reluctant acceptance. Councillor Valron clicked his mandibles, the tension in his posture easing slightly. "And if you lose control, Captain Dre, what then? What becomes of the galaxy when your rage runs unchecked?" Elena's eyes hardened, her jaw tightening. "Then we will do what we must to protect you, from the swarm and from ourselves. We understand the risks, but we cannot sit idly by while entire worlds are devoured. We are willing to pay the price, whatever it may be."
Longer before a deep voice rumbled through the chamber, Councillor Thrix, a massive rock-like being from the Devonar system, spoke up. "I say we let them fight. This swarm cannot be reasoned with. If the humans are willing to risk everything, then perhaps
One by one, the council members gave their assent, some more reluctantly than others. The final vote was cast, and it was decided. The Wrathborn would be deployed to the front lines to face the Xerian swarm.
Elena nodded, her face betraying no emotion, though her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The fate of the galaxy now rested, at least in part, on her and her squad. She turned and left the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the vast space as the council moved on to other matters. The weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on her shoulders. Outside the council chamber, Elena found her second-in-command, Marcus, waiting. He leaned against a wall, his arms crossed, a grim smile on his face. "So?" he asked, pushing himself upright as she approached. "We're going," Elena said simply. "They approved it. We leave for the front lines as soon as we're ready." Marcus nodded, his smile fading. "I figured as much. The others are prepping. They know what's coming." Elena met his gaze, the unspoken understanding passing between them. They had trained for this, but nothing could truly prepare them for what was to come. The Berserker Rage was a dangerous weapon, one that could just as easily destroy them as it could their enemies. But it was also their only chance. "Let's get to it then," Elena said, her voice firm. "We've got a galaxy to save." With that, they walked together down the long corridor, ready to face whatever awaited them on the battlefield. For better or worse, the Wrathborn would unleash their fury, and the galaxy would finally see what it meant for humanity to be pushed to the edge. The Wrathborn's base was located on a remote planet, far from the comforts of civilization. It was a stark, utilitarian outpost, surrounded by harsh, rocky terrain. The air was thick with a sense of unease, the kind that settled into the bones and made every moment feel like the calm before a storm. The base itself was a collection of prefabricated structures, all gray and unassuming, designed for function rather than comfort. Elena walked through the camp, her eyes scanning the scene before her. Soldiers moved with purpose, each one preparing for what lay ahead. Weapons were being checked and rechecked, supplies gathered, armor adjusted. The air buzzed with tension. They all knew the kind of fight they were walking into, and they all understood what was at stake. As she moved through the rows of soldiers, Elena noticed the looks they gave her, some filled with respect, others with a mix of fear and admiration. The Wrathborn were different, even among their fellow humans. They were the ones willing to embrace the darkness within, to tap into something primal that most feared, and that made them both revered and isolated. Elena entered one of the larger buildings, a makeshift command center where her squad was gathered. The room was filled with the hum of alien technology, the consoles glowing with various readouts and data on their mission. Around a holographic table stood the core members of the Wrathborn, Marcus, Sarah, and Talia. Each of them bore the scars of countless battles, marks of their survival, of their willingness to face what others would not. Marcus looked up as Elena entered, nodding to her. "Captain," he said, his tone steady. "We've got the initial plans drawn up. The council wasn't kidding. This is going to be a hell of a fight." Elena approached the table, her eyes scanning the holographic display of the battlefield. It showed a sprawling asteroid field, with enemy positions marked in red. The Xerian swarm was entrenched, and they would need every ounce of strength to break through. She took a deep breath, her gaze meeting each of her squad members in turn. "We've faced worse," Elena said, her voice calm. "This mission is about more than just surviving. It's about showing the galaxy that we're not afraid to do what needs to be done. We all know the risks, and we all know what the Berserker Rage can do, to our enemies and to us. But it's our best shot. We can't let fear stop us now." Sarah, the team's weapons specialist, spoke up, her voice tinged with determination. "I've made a few tweaks to our gear. Enhanced the stabilizers to help us control the rage once we trigger it. We'll need every advantage we can get out there." She looked at Elena, her eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. "But there's no guarantee. Once we're in the thick of it, it's all instinct." "I trust your work, Sarah," Elena replied, her tone firm. "And I trust all of you. We've trained for this. We know how to control the rage, how to channel it where it needs to go. We'll keep each other grounded." Talia, the squad's medic, shook her head slightly, a wry smile on her lips. "Grounded. That's a nice way to put it, Captain. More like keeping each other from going completely feral." Marcus chuckled, though there was no humor in his eyes. "Whatever it takes, right?" Elena allowed herself a small smile. "Whatever it takes," she echoed. She stepped back from the table, her expression growing more serious. "I need each of you to be ready. Not just physically, but mentally. The rage is a tool, but it can also be a curse if we let it take over. Remember what we're fighting for. Remember why we're doing this. We're not monsters, we're soldiers. We fight so that others don't have to. Later that evening, Elena found Marcus sitting alone in one of the smaller rooms, a dimly lit space that served as their quarters. He was holding a small, worn photograph, his family, smiling back at him from a different time, a different life. Elena leaned against the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer than before. Marcus looked up, his eyes tired but resolute. "Yeah," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. "Just thinking about what comes next. It's easy to forget why we do this sometimes. But then I look at them, and I remember." Elena nodded, crossing the room to sit beside him. She looked at the photograph, at the faces of people she'd never met but knew were important. "We're doing this for them," she said. "For all of them. The people who can't fight, who need us to stand between them and the darkness. It's not easy, and it never will be. But it's worth it." Marcus sighed, slipping the photograph back into his pocket. "I know. I just hope we can come back from this one, Elena. The rage, it's different every time. It feels like it takes a little more each time we use it." Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "We will come back," she said. "All of us. We're in this together, Marcus. We always have been. And no matter what happens out there, we'll bring each other home." Marcus nodded, the hint of a smile returning to his face. "Yeah, together." Elena stood, her expression resolute. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we face the swarm, and we'll show them exactly what the Wrathborn are made of." With that, she left the room, her footsteps echoing softly as she walked down the corridor, her mind already on the battle ahead. The Wrathborn were ready, and the galaxy would soon see the lengths to which humanity was willing to go to protect their own. The Wrathborn were on the move. The small, heavily armored ship, known as the Vanguard, cut through the darkness of space, its engines humming with a steady, determined rhythm. Inside the cramped interior, the tension was almost tangible. Each of the Wrathborn sat in their designated places, silent and focused, their minds already on the battle ahead. The journey to the front lines felt both impossibly long and all too brief, the moments slipping by like grains of sand in an hourglass. Elena stood near the cockpit, her eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space beyond the reinforced glass. Stars glittered in the distance, their cold light a stark contrast to the fire that burned within her and her team. The Xerian swarm was out there, somewhere amidst the asteroid belt they were fast approaching. A relentless, unfeeling enemy that had left a path of destruction across countless systems. Ren, their pilot, glanced over at Elena, his fingers dancing across the controls. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates," he said, his voice steady. "We'll be in visual range of the swarm's front lines soon." Elena nodded, her expression unreadable. She turned to face the rest of her squad, her eyes meeting theirs one by one. Marcus, Sarah, Talia. All of them looked back at her, their expressions a mix of determination and readiness. This was it. The moment they had trained for. The moment they had feared and anticipated in equal measure. "Everyone knows the plan," Elena said, her voice carrying through the small cabin. "We breach the outer defenses, make our way to the command center, and take out their leadership. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast. And remember, stick together. No one goes off alone. We're a team, and we do this as a team." Marcus gave a sharp nod, his eyes fierce. "We've got your back, Captain. We always do." Sarah checked her gear one last time, her fingers moving with practiced precision over her weapons. "Ready to bring the pain," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. The Vanguard slipped into the asteroid field, the massive rocks drifting silently around them. Ren navigated with skill, weaving between the debris with precision. The ship's exterior lights flickered, casting eerie shadows against the dark surfaces of the asteroids. The swarm's presence became apparent, a series of jagged insectoid ships moving in patrol patterns, their silhouettes sharp and menacing. Elena felt her heart pound in her chest as the enemy came into view. "All right, Wrathborn," she said, her voice unwavering. Time to show the galaxy what we're made of. She reached for the injector on her arm, the serum that would unleash the Berserker Rage. The others followed her lead, each of them pressing the injector to their skin. There was a brief moment of hesitation, a shared understanding of the cost, the sacrifice they were making. The serum burned as it entered her veins, a fire that spread through her body, igniting every nerve. Elena felt her senses sharpen, her vision narrowing, until all she could see was the enemy ahead. The rage took hold, powerful and intoxicating, a force that demanded to be unleashed. She clenched her jaw, fighting for control, channeling the fury into focus. The Wrathborn roared as one, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light, their bodies thrumming with power. Ren pushed the ship forward, and the vanguard surged towards the enemy lines, guns blazing. The first of the Zarian ships exploded in a burst of fire and metal, the Wrathborn's rage fueling their assault. The battle was chaos. The vanguard weaved through enemy fire, the Wrathborn tearing through the swarm's ships with brutal efficiency. Elena felt the rush of combat, the rage pushing her beyond her limits, her every movement fueled by an instinct as old as humanity itself. She could feel the line between control and madness blur, the Berserker Rage threatening to consume her entirely. But she held on, her thoughts focused on her team, on the mission, on the countless lives depending on them. Sarah let out a fierce yell as she fired her weapon, her eyes blazing with fury. Talia moved beside her, her focus unwavering as she provided cover, her movements precise even in the midst of the chaos. Marcus was a force of nature, his strength amplified by the rage, his attacks leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The Zarian forces were relentless, but the Wrathborn were more. They were the embodiment of humanity's will to survive, to fight against impossible odds. They pushed forward, their combined fury breaking through the enemy lines, inching closer to the command center. Elena could feel the exhaustion beginning to set in, the toll of the rage, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for weakness, not now. "Captain, we're almost there," Marcus called out, his voice barely audible over the roar of battle. "We need to take out the command ship." Elena nodded, her eyes locking on the massive Zarian vessel that loomed ahead. "This is it," she said, her voice raw with determination. "We take out that ship, and we cut the head off the swarm. Let's end this." The vanguard closed in on the command ship, the Wrathborn ready to unleash the full force of their fury. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they would not stop until the Zarian swarm was destroyed or they themselves were no more. The Wrathborn stormed the Zarian command ship, their fury an unstoppable force. The moment they breached the outer hull, the ship's metallic corridors became a battleground. The Wrathborn moved as one, a hurricane of destruction, cutting through Zarian warriors that rushed to defend their command. Elena felt the rage coursing through her, a searing power that made her strikes faster, stronger, and deadlier. She fought to stay in control, to use the rage rather than let it use her. But she could feel it pushing at the edges of her sanity. The Zarians fought back with vicious determination. The alien warriors, with their sharp exoskeletons and serrated weapons, lunged at the Wrathborn with no regard for their own lives. For every enemy they felled, another took its place. Yet the Wrathborn were undeterred, their focus unbroken, their rage giving them strength beyond what their bodies should have allowed. Marcus moved ahead, his powerful frame smashing through enemy lines, his fists covered in Zarian ichor. He roared, his eyes blazing with the unnatural glow of the Berserker Rage. Elena stayed close, her eyes scanning for any sign of the command center. The ship was a maze of twisting corridors, each one more heavily guarded than the last. It was as though the Zarians understood what the Wrathborn were capable of, and they were terrified. "On your left!" Talia shouted, her voice cutting through the din of battle. Elena spun, her weapon slicing through an approaching Zarian soldier, the alien's body crumpling to the ground. Talia nodded in thanks, her own hands stained with the green ichor of their enemies. As they pushed deeper into the ship, Elena could feel the rage taking its toll. Every movement felt like a battle within herself, a struggle between the primal urge to destroy and the disciplined focus she had trained so hard to maintain. Her team was in similar straits. Marcus's attacks grew more reckless, and even Sarah's normally sharp aim seemed to falter, her eyes wild with fury. They were winning, but it was costing them. The rage was both their greatest weapon and their greatest curse. Each time they tapped into it, they gave away a piece of themselves. Elena knew that if they survived this, they might never be the same. Finally, they reached the heart of the ship, the command center. The door was heavily reinforced, but to the Wrathborn, it was merely another obstacle to tear down. Marcus and Sarah moved forward, their combined strength ripping the door from its frame. Inside, the Zarian commanders stared at them with a mixture of hatred and fear, their alien eyes wide as they saw the glowing fury of the humans who had come for them. Elena stepped inside, her gaze locking onto the leader of the Zarian forces. It was a massive creature, its exoskeleton black as night, its many eyes watching her with a cold, calculating intelligence. This was the mind behind the swarm, the force that had destroyed countless lives across the galaxy. Without hesitation, the Wrathborn attacked. The command center erupted into chaos, the Zarians attempting to defend themselves but quickly overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the human assault. Elena moved with purpose, her every strike precise and lethal. The Zarian leader fought back, its claws slashing at her, but Elena dodged, her body moving with a speed and fluidity that only the rage could provide. In those moments, she could feel the eyes of the galaxy upon her. She knew that somewhere, far away, the Council was watching, the other species waiting to see if the humans could succeed, or if they would become the monsters the galaxy feared they could be. The question echoed in her mind. Were they heroes, or were they something else entirely? Something darker, more dangerous. The battle reached its climax as Marcus, with a roar that seemed to shake the very walls, plunged his weapon into the Zarian leader's chest. The creature let out a final, shrill scream before collapsing, its life extinguished. The room fell silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of the Wrathborn. Elena stood over the fallen leader, her chest heaving, the rage still burning hot within her. She looked at her team, Marcus, Sarah, Talia, all of them battered, their eyes still glowing with the remnants of their fury. They had done it. They had cut the head off the swarm. But as she looked at the devastation around them, the bodies of the Zarians strewn across the floor, she couldn't help but wonder at the cost. Far away in the Galactic Council chamber, the debate raged on. The diplomats watched the footage of the battle, their faces a mix of awe, fear, and uncertainty. Some spoke of the humans as heroes, the saviors of the galaxy, willing to do what no one else could. Others, however, saw something more dangerous, a power that was uncontrollable, a force that could as easily destroy as it could save. "Are they saviors?" Counselor Valron asked, his voice carrying through the chamber. "Or are they monsters we have unleashed upon ourselves?" Counselor Threx, the massive rock-like being, rumbled in response. "They saved us today. The swarm is broken because of them. Perhaps they are both, heroes and monsters. And perhaps that is what we need." The room fell into a heavy silence, the images of the Wrathborn still displayed above them. The question remained unanswered, hanging in the air as the Council considered the future. The galaxy had seen what the Wrathborn could do, what humanity could do when pushed to the brink. Now, they had to decide if they were willing to accept that power, or if they feared it too much to let it continue. Back on the command ship, Elena looked at her team, her voice hoarse as she spoke. "We did it," she said, though there was no triumph in her tone, only exhaustion and a deep, gnawing uncertainty. "Let's get out of here. We've done what we came to do." The Wrathborn moved as one, leaving behind the wreckage of the command center, the rage slowly fading, but the scars it left behind all too real. They had won, but at what cost? That was a question only time could answer. The Wrathborn staggered back to the vanguard, their bodies aching, their minds clouded by the fading remnants of the rage. Elena could still feel the fire simmering within her, though it had begun to burn out, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Each step was heavy, and as she looked at her squad, She saw the toll their fight had taken. They were alive, but they were changed. The Berserker Rage had pushed them to the very edge, and now they had to pull themselves back. The Vanguard's loading ramp opened, and Ren was waiting for them, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of his comrades. They were covered in the green ichor of their enemies, their armor dented and scorched. There was no need for words. Ren simply nodded, stepping aside as the Wrathborn filed into the ship. "We're heading home," Elena said, her voice quiet. She met Ren's gaze, her expression betraying the weariness she felt deep in her bones. "Take us out of here." Ren nodded again, moving to the pilot's seat and beginning the launch sequence. The Vanguard shuddered as the engines roared to life, lifting off from the devastated Zarian command ship. As they left the battlefield behind, Elena allowed herself a moment to close her eyes, her thoughts drifting to the battle, to the faces of the Zarians who had looked at her with fear. Were they heroes, or were they monsters? The question gnawed at her, refusing to let go. They had won, but it felt hollow. The Rage had saved them, but it had also taken something from each of them. Elena glanced at Marcus, who sat across from her, his head resting against the bulkhead, his eyes closed. He looked more tired than she had ever seen him, the Berserker Rage leaving behind a hollowness that no victory could fill. "Captain?" Ren's voice crackled over the comms, breaking the silence. "We're getting a distress signal. It's from one of our allied ships. They're under attack. Looks like another wave of the swarm." Elena's eyes snapped open, her body tensing despite the exhaustion. "Another wave?" she muttered, her heart sinking. They had cut the head off the swarm, but clearly the body still moved. She pushed herself to her feet, her legs protesting the effort. "Plot a course, Ren. We're not done yet." Marcus opened his eyes, frowning. "Elena, we're barely holding on as it is. We need rest. The Rage, it's taking its toll." Elena met his gaze, her expression hardening. "I know, Marcus, but if we don't do this, more people will die. We have to finish what we started. We have to make sure the swarm is truly defeated." Marcus held her gaze for a moment before nodding, a resigned determination settling over him. "All right," he said, his voice heavy. "One more time." The Vanguard sped toward the source of the distress signal, the Wrathborn preparing themselves once more. They injected the serum, the familiar burn spreading through their veins, the Rage reigniting within them. It was a dangerous dance, a balance between power and control, between heroism and monstrosity. Elena felt the fire take hold, her senses sharpening, the exhaustion fading as the fury consumed her. The Allied ship came into view, surrounded by the jagged forms of Zarian vessels. Without hesitation, Ren pushed the Vanguard forward, the ship's weapons blazing as they tore into the enemy lines. The Wrathborn roared, their eyes glowing with the unearthly light of the Berserker Rage, their bodies thrumming with power. They boarded the Allied ship, the corridors already overrun with Zarians. The Wrathborn moved with lethal efficiency, their rage propelling them through the enemy forces, each movement a blur of violence and fury. Elena could feel herself slipping, the line between control and madness blurring as the battle raged on. It was harder now, harder to pull herself back, harder to remember why they were fighting. They reached the core of the ship where the Zarian leader directing the attack was located. The creature was massive, its exoskeleton covered in sharp spines, its eyes filled with a cold intelligence. Elena lunged at it, her weapon cutting through the air, her every strike driven by the Rage. The Zarian fought back, its claws slashing at her, but she pressed on, her fury unstoppable. In the end, it was Marcus who dealt the killing blow, his weapon piercing the creature's heart. The Zarian let out a final gurgling scream before collapsing, its body crumpling to the floor. The Wrathborn stood over it, their breathing heavy, the rage slowly ebbing away, leaving behind only exhaustion. Elena looked around, her vision clearing as the rage faded. The corridors were littered with the bodies of their enemies, the Allied crew staring at them with a mix of awe and fear. She could see it in their eyes, the same question that had plagued her since the beginning. Were they heroes, or were they something else entirely? She turned to her team, her voice hoarse as she spoke. "We did it," she said, though the words felt empty. "The swarm is defeated. We've won." But even as she said it, she knew the victory had come at a great cost. The rage had taken its toll, and she could see it in the faces of her squad, in the hollow look in Marcus's eyes, in the way Sarah's hands trembled as she lowered her weapon. They had won, but they had lost a part of themselves in the process. Back on the vanguard, the Wrathborn sat in silence as Ren piloted them away from the battlefield. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind only the weight of what they had done. Elena stared out at the stars, her mind filled with the images of the battle, of the fear in the eyes of those they had saved. They were heroes. They were monsters. Perhaps they were both. And perhaps that was what the galaxy needed them to be. "Set a course for home," Elena said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's go home." The vanguard moved through the darkness of space, carrying the Wrathborn away from the battlefield, away from the questions that had no answers. They had done what needed to be done, and now they would face whatever came next, together.